Hello, welcome to the continuation of Staff University's Christmas lectures. Today we have, now we have Jaimie Ditchfield with us, who's going to talk about the rise and fall of cloud gaming technologies, which is quite interesting. I mean, Jaimie, do you play on any cloud gaming systems?
I don't. I just get yelled at by Steam every now and then when my save files haven't synced up, which I hope Jaimie Ditchfield can solve for me in this presentation. That's what it's about, right?
I considered for a while getting the RTX now, which lets you, NVIDIA now, which lets you play on one of the RTX 4090 machines. But then I realized, like an idiot, I'd put my graphics card in the wrong PCIe slot, so my graphics card wasn't getting its maximum performance. So now I can play Alan Wake at 60 FPS,
Nice.
which is quite nice. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what Jaimie has to talk about. I hope everyone else is as well. So without further ado, we'll pass over to Jaimie to get started talking about the fall and rise of cloud gaming technologies.
Hello, Jaimie Ditchfield.
Hey guys, thank you. Right, yeah. So as Ben and Jaimie wonderfully introduced me, I'm going to be talking today about the fall and rise of cloud gaming technologies. As I go through the lecture, you'll kind of understand why I chose to put the word fall before rise, because there's quite an extensive history with cloud gaming, and I'm going to talk about different platforms and basically where it came from and how the technology is progressing. So yeah, let's get straight into it. So just a bit about me really quick. Ben and Jaimie already introduced me, but yeah, I'm Jaimie Ditchfield. I am currently the course leader for Games PR and Community Management at Staffordshire University. I specialize in journalism, marketing, public relations, and design. I've got quite a few different areas of specialism. And yeah, I've been featured on a bunch of different websites like Nintendo Life, Push Square, and on those sites, at times I have spoke about cloud gaming quite a bit. And there's a bit more information there about me as well. I like the Switch, I like Zelda, and yeah, really like Majora's Mask. So to get started, clouds can travel at speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, depending on the altitude and weather conditions. So if you did not know that, there you go. It can't be a lecture about cloud streaming without a random fact about clouds. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. So there's Grandpa Simpson angrily shouting at a cloud. I use this image a lot for some reason. I don't know. Simpsons memes are funny. Yeah, so what we're going to do is cloud gaming. So why have I chose to speak about cloud gaming? Well, as I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, there's a lot of future potential for how we access and play games through cloud gaming. We're starting to see that now with Xbox Game Pass. We're seeing it with PlayStation's Plus offerings. Even Nintendo have jumped into the game, and then there's also Nvidia GeForce Now, and all these different available platforms that you can use. You can also look at it from an accessibility perspective as well, both positive and negative, as I'll explain later on. But yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and it can shape the way that we play and access games. And there are a lot of future possibilities for how it will progress in a few years' time. So yeah, we're going to first focus on the history of cloud gaming. I am not going to the right slide. There we go. So we're going to focus on the history, how cloud gaming actually works. If any of you are unfamiliar with actually how the technology is used, I'll explain that, and that's no problem. We're going to look at Google Stadia, because Google Stadia is an example of what happens when a platform fails to get an audience. Currently, how cloud gaming is being used, what are the companies doing, is it successful, what are the drawbacks to that technology, and just some general thoughts for the future. Is it a viable technology? Will we be using this more as time goes on? So, cloud gaming is roughly defined as a method of playing games using remote servers from data centers. So these servers can be provided by an individual publisher. So in Microsoft's case, obviously be Xbox that are supporting that, PlayStation, or Sony in that case, and then Nintendo usually work with publishers to provide a proprietary platform that you download, or a client, I should say, onto your Nintendo Switch console. But the idea is that you connect your device to the server and you were able to stream the contents through the internet. So you don't have to download any files. It's all done through the internet, which, as we're seeing now, is becoming more of a interesting option, because a lot of the time you have to install a game before you can even play it. That wasn't the case years ago, but now that is the industry standard. You have to actually install the games. But with this technology, you can download that, well, stream that content. You don't have to actually download massive files. But yeah, this is now possible on phones, computers, televisions, as we'll explain as we go on. But generally, you don't need like super impressive specs to even access this content as well, because we're getting into the era where games are becoming more graphically and just intensive in terms of the requirements. And not everyone has access to be able to afford those things. So what are the actual advantages of cloud gaming? So there's 3 key areas that I want to really push as sort of the big advantages for this particular form of gameplay. So like I was saying, there's no installation required. You don't have to install any files to your console. It's or in your on your phone, whatever platform you're using. It's a direct streaming, similar to Netflix. You're just streaming the content. You don't actually need a console, like I was saying as well. So TVs are now an option. Like, no matter where you want to play, there is probably an option for that. And yeah, we're starting to see that being supported more through accessories for mobile phones, such as the backbone, and just other ways to play games, and like just through apps on your phone, which is incredible. And that adds to the portability element, right? So you can take these games away from your home, and if you've got the data for it, you can stream these games wherever you want. So you could be on a commute, you could be, I don't know, at a friend's house. You might just want to play a game, but you're not near a console at the moment. You might be like me. Sometimes I like to play a game before I go to sleep, so I might not fancy booting up a console, so I'll have it on my phone. So there are options like that as well. But then we move on to the disadvantages. There are quite a number of these, but I'm focusing on 3 for today. So obviously, if you're constantly streaming data, so you obviously, when you're watching a film, you are streaming the data across to your device. But with games, there is a lot more interactivity going on, right? So the data utilization is a lot higher compared to a platform such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus. And if you don't have the package or the necessary internet speed, or because a lot of people might not have access to unlimited Wi-Fi roaming data, so that can be a problem. And there are some solutions to that, like changing the quality of the resolution and the game for the gameplay, just to try and narrow down that a little bit. But that is still a big issue that a lot of people really struggle with when it comes to cloud streaming. Poor latency is probably the best, well, not the best, sorry, the worst thing that can happen when it comes to cloud gaming. So if you have a really poor gameplay experience, so I was working as a journalist, when I don't enjoy a game, I document that. And if you have a poor gameplay experience, that can put you off maybe similar titles, or in this case, the technology of cloud streaming. So if you don't know what latency is, that's basically a bit of a delay between your inputs on your controller and the actual data that's being put onto your screen. That can be really frustrating when it comes to racing games, games with a lot of reactivity, where you have to be very quick on your movements. Shooters are a big example of that as well. But that kind of ties into the last point, that not everyone has the recommended speed. So yeah, you might not actually be able to have the speed. I've just got a question. Hey, hope you're well. At what point do you think game streaming will go from hurt that's neat to a proper method of gaming? That's a really good question. So I think as time goes on, the advancements in technology and maybe the accessibility of internet speeds that actually are able to stream this technology properly will be beneficial. Yeah, it's kind of a difficult one to give it like a proper time frame, but we've seen in interviews with Phil Spencer from Microsoft that they are trying to push that as a way to be able to try a game without installing it. So I think at the moment we are in basically the phase of cloud streaming being used. Just I want to try this game, but I don't want to download it. We are using it for that now, so we get a bit of a trial. But I think maybe give it a few years. We're starting to see digital-only consoles emerge. We're seeing that already with the Xbox and PlayStation. And apparently Xbox's next console is primarily an all-digital console. So, like, if we live in a time now where people are more precious about their storage space on their consoles, having to delete a game constantly is kind of annoying. And I think that having that element available to just stream it and see if you like it is really a really positive way to maybe even discover a game that you might have not necessarily played before. That's happened to me, and that's kind of the intention behind Game Pass, as I'll explain as I go through later on. But yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking. But that kind of ties into the internet speed that is recommended. So apparently Sony recommend at least 5 megabits per second, whereas 15 megabits per second is good for 1080p, and then up to 40 for 4K and HDR. So there are some pretty high requirements. Like if you're in a family environment where you have limited download speeds and you're streaming different things all at once, that can be quite difficult to manage. Anyway, so let's just pull that up. So I mentioned Netflix at the beginning of this lecture, right? Netflix is very interesting because they basically push this idea of on-demand content. So when it launched in 2007, it wasn't before it launched in 2007. Sorry, it wasn't quite what we know it as today. Netflix was based around the idea of you would request like a film or a TV show from the company. I think they were associated with Love Film at one point. And they would send you a physical version of that film. And that's how Netflix operated for many years. And then it wasn't until 2007 when they turned into a streaming service that started to really push this idea of on-demand content. So we basically define that as content that you can access at any time. You can push a button and you can watch, like your favorite TV show, movie. And then in the case of cloud streaming for games, it's that exact same thing for games. With a push of a button, you can access a game. And it's incredible now that you can do that on your phone. And it's becoming more and more of a thing that companies are starting to try. And yeah, we'll go through some more of that in a moment. But it was revolutionary for the time. As you can see on my slide there, it has over 247 million subscribers as of this year. And streaming services now have become obviously a common thing. You have Amazon Prime and all the others as well. And now you're starting to see that replicated in the gaming industry as well. But there's a bit of a history that I'm going to kind of fly through here. So there's a lot behind cloud gaming. It did start a lot earlier than what many people think. So if we go back to the early 2000s, so in 2003, there was a startup company called G-Cluster. And what's interesting about G-Cluster is that it was one of the earliest, I think it is the earliest attempt at cloud gaming. It was going for a similar thing what we know of today, in the sense of you have a bunch of games that you can kind of click on. So on the screenshot here, this is a UI from the physical add-on that you would plug into your TV, or I think it's like a HDMI, USB sort of thing. This is the UI that they used for it. So you can see it's kind of that streaming navigation, right? Where you just pick which one you want to use. As you can see, there's a big Disney presence on there, big EA presence with Mirror's Edge. And the idea behind this originally was that it was for PC gamers only. So you would if you're playing on PC, you would connect to this client that they developed. But the difference was it was more based on a service provider that they utilized. So they would work with another service provider. Oh, just got another question from the chat. So really interesting. How impactful do you think cloud gaming will be on the sustainability of the gaming industry? That's a really good question. So there's different ways you can look at it. So from obviously, when you've got these servers running, it might be negative from the perspective of it's using a lot of energy, and that can be bad environmentally, especially when we look at how NVIDIA GeForce Now is utilized. So the way that one works is that they actually have PCs running with a specific graphics card that you want to run the game on based on the subscription model that you choose. So you have them running in the background constantly, which isn't environmentally friendly at the end of the day, because using a lot of electricity, which is using a lot of resources in the end that can lead to global warming, and there's a lot of issues in that sense. But when you look at it from a different perspective, when you look at it from the perspective of cloud gaming as sustainable in games in terms of accessibility, as I was mentioning, it opens up a lot of doors for getting people to play games that they might not necessarily seen before. It's really good for indie games because a lot of time with indie games, they find it really difficult to reach an audience. But through services such as Xbox Game Pass, you can discover this content and you can try it out before you actually install it. So you are in turn helping to support a developer that might not necessarily have the chance before. And I find it really interesting. But yeah, really good question. But I do think that it can be both positive and negative. And it just depends on how we go forward from there. No worries. Thank you for the question. Yeah, indie games is definitely a big thing that I push for, and it's a thing that we need to really focus on. I think as the industry is becoming more and more focused on, like, well, not really focused on, but there's a lot more indie games out there, right? There's a lot more people experimenting and trying to release titles and get the attention that they so rightly deserve. But moving back to G Cluster. So yeah, as you can see the UI there, so it had the streaming setup, but it was exclusive to PC gaming at the time, which is kind of a problem considering at that time in the early 2000s, the PS2 was the most popular platform for play, especially in the UK anyways, and it was kind of one of the most popular platforms across the world. It had obviously genre-defining titles. You had the GTA series on there. With GTA 3, they were able to push the boundaries of the sandbox genre. So you had all of these really amazing console exclusives launching on PS2, GameCube, Xbox. But PC back then, and like it was like in the 90s and early 2000s, PC gaming was very much focused on games that I like to call them God mode games. So, like the strategy games and like games where you had more of a simulation feel behind them. It was more games like that. So, like MMOs as well. But most people were interested in experiencing console games because of the simple nature of being able to access the content. So, buy a PS2, plug it into your television, you play it. So, having that option at the time kind of took away from what G Cluster was trying to achieve with cloud streaming. So everyone's attention was obviously on the PS2, which, as we now know, has sold over 150 million units worldwide, which has now made it the best-selling video game console of all time, which is really impressive. And Sony have continued to advance in that sense in terms of their domination of the market. It's a lot more balanced now, but back then it was definitely console-focused. And like I mentioned, so you've got the Xbox and the GameCube. Again, they were part of the console race at this time. So there wasn't really enough room for cloud streaming to breathe. The competitors were still there. You had Xbox doing their thing. They advanced technology in online gaming with Xbox Live. And then you saw PS2 start to do that in select markets as well. So having internet access in this time was a nice to have. It wasn't really a general thing that everyone just has, where it's kind of now the internet is more readily accessible, but back then it wasn't really. It was occasionally you would have someone who wouldn't have the internet at all, which was so having games where you can play them offline was the way to go. Hence why games sold really well on consoles back then. Physical media as well. But as we move forward into the late 2000s, going into early 2010, so by 2010, the technology had advanced. So we started to see things like smartphones, like obviously the iPhone, and obviously video technology improved at this point. So there are more opportunities to further develop cloud tech. So one thing I like to point out when it comes to smartphones is that smartphones caused a drastic change in society, because the iPhone in particular was one of the reasons why physical print media went into decline, especially gaming magazines. So that sort of technology being introduced was revolutionary, not only for this but for other elements as well. But there are two companies that I want to talk about in particular when it comes to this, so particularly Gaikai and OnLive, which launched in 2008 and 2009 respectively. So we'll start off with OnLive. So OnLive was very similar to Gaikai, but the idea is that it was, again, this sort of platform that you see on my screen here, where it's focused on a UI where you get to play a bunch of different games. This had a subscription-based model, and the idea was that you would subscribe and access a variety of content that's on here. It even managed to get the attention of Ubisoft, 2K, and THQ, which at the time were major publishers and still are to this day. And a subscription model at this time, when you had other things attempting a similar thing, was quite difficult to navigate for this particular company, because you have, like, obviously Xbox Live and things like that now, but at this time, subscription models were kind of becoming a new thing in the industry. So trying to push a service that has a subscription focused entirely around cloud gaming, it was a hard to sell thing. But one thing it did revolutionize is a term that we referred to as a thin client game system, which I will go through shortly. But we see the technology being replicated in devices such as the PlayStation Portal, which was released, I think it was like the middle of November last month. So it is a new piece of hardware, and you are seeing it now in 2023. But Gaikai is really interesting because they actually caught the attention of a major publisher, which I'll go through in a moment. But this company was founded in the Netherlands back in 2008, and they really tried to emphasize the accessibility of cloud streaming. They wanted people to be able to play demos of games without having to have a demo disc or an actual download to be able to run it. So the way they achieved this was by integrating cloud tech into various websites and social media platforms. Facebook was the big one. And this was at a time where Facebook was at sort of a good point in time. It was before all of the drama started to really kick off, but there was also still a negative perception of the platform. That was there, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And yeah, again, it featured quite a few games here. So it had Dead Space 2, The Sims, Spore. So a big EA presence there, which obviously they're a big publisher. So having the backing of a publisher as prolific as EA was good for the company, which kind of moves us on to how this was implemented. So they had two ways of doing this. So they had the ad network and the open platform. So the ad network was the most popular way of them actually getting any coverage. So the idea was that a website would join up with Gaikai to promote demos in cloud streaming tech for games. And this was done initially on The Escapist, which, if you're unfamiliar with The Escapist is a major written publication. Not so much now after the recent controversy, but back then they were quite a big platform because they had zero punctuation as sort of their big marketing force. So they would encourage people to go on their website, play a demo for a game, and they would then have the option to then go buy the game following after the demo. And as you can see from the statistics, it was really successful, and it garnered over 10 million monthly active users by late 2011. But yeah, the company got bought by Sony, and Sony are obviously a very big company. They started to use the resources that they acquired from this company to further develop their own cloud streaming technologies. So if anyone can remember PlayStation Now, that was Sony's initial strategy when it came to cloud gaming. It was the idea, it was a separate subscription from PlayStation Plus. You would pay a premium, and you would get an access to legacy PS3 content, because the way the PS4 was designed, it made it impossible for the PS3 to actually, for PS3 games to be played, because the architecture was vastly different. So they used this to be able to stream PS3 content over to the PS4. Probably not the most optimal way of doing it, but it then allowed you to experience legacy content. So they are inadvertently preserving these titles on the service that they were going for. But they also used the purchase to enforce and further develop their remote play scheme, which allowed you to stream your games over to your PlayStation Portable and your PlayStation Vita. But now it's been now PlayStation Now has been merged with PlayStation Plus, and that they are kind of the same service now. So there's a lot less confusion about two subscription models, and it's a lot more accessible. So yeah, a thin client game system, as you can see on the diagram here, is basically a device that has very few local resources and relies entirely on access to servers to function properly. So as you can see on the above bubble there, you have the device, you then input the controls. So let's say you press the A button on a platformer. That then gets pushed over to the server, and then that server then sends that input back. So you actually see the input being made, and it goes back to your screen. It's very simple. And the idea is that it allows devices with very low specifications. It could be like compared to obviously current top-of-the-range PCs, it could be very, very minuscule in terms of the tech that it actually has inside it. And you can actually consider some smartphones, TVs, and other pieces of technology to kind of use this sort of as the main premise for the thin client game system. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we've seen this in the PlayStation Portal, and Xbox even started to integrate cloud streaming into smart TVs. All you need is an Xbox controller, and then you can stream this over to the television. But yeah, it can be very user-friendly having this technology. There's a quote here that basically says, because modern games normally require tremendous computing and rendering power at the game client, deploying games with such models can transfer the burden of hardware upgrades from players to game operators. So the general premise behind this is that obviously not everyone has access to a PS5, not everyone has access to a high-end PC. So having the option to be able to play these games without the required hardware is excellent. And you've seen that with Xbox. Again, I keep mentioning Xbox, but they probably do it the best, where you see that being integrated into Game Pass. And the idea, which I move on to now, according to Phil Spencer, is that they've basically gone for the approach on giving customers choice in how they play. And they try and encourage people to, no matter what they play on, they can experience this content. And that's the idea. Do you think, and in what ways, might the ISPs and internet infrastructure accelerate or dampen the further development of cloud gaming? Like thin client game streaming, phone data likely puts a cap on it. Yeah, that's the issue. As I've been discussing throughout the lecture, it's. I think we have to get to a point where the internet, they provide the service that is provided is at a adequate level, like in terms of collectively for how the cloud gaming is actually implemented and the speed, and I guess more companies need to try and make it so it's a lot better in terms of the gameplay experience, because the worst thing that can happen is you play a game via cloud streaming, you have a terrible experience, and then you get put off by the technology, which is a stigma that we're currently facing. I do think that there are ways for it to do that. Do I know the answers? Probably not. But the one thing I would suggest is that we need to get to a point where the accessibility of good internet speeds is a collective thing, not just to like individuals. Like we need to try and make it accessible. Maybe that's by the pricing. In terms of like other things, there's a lot that kind of goes into that. There's a really good question, but with hardware such as the PlayStation Portal, they are trying to take that through other avenues. So maybe we'll get to a point where we can access that content and it's a good experience for all. Who knows? Thank you for your question. Hopefully that answers it. Right. Yeah, so speaking on thin client game systems, they actually do rely on obviously internet, broadband access, and availability of servers. So if you don't have any of that, it becomes a paperweight. So yeah, that's kind of a thing. So if you don't have, if they aren't available, you can't use the technology, which is a bit annoying. Yeah, so we're going to talk about Google Stadia now. So Google Stadia obviously is probably the most infamous cloud streaming platform. It launched in 2019 and it was designed to compete with other emerging technologies. They basically promised that the reason that Google Stadia was going to be different was that they were going to have exclusive content on there. They were going to have all of this. You can use it on any of your tablets, your phones. It was going to be a premium service. But what happened was they started to kind of go back on promises, and the requirements to use Google Stadia properly were quite intense. So we've spoken about internet speed. The requirements to use Google Stadia at its most optimum level was actually really difficult to meet the demands of what they were asking for. And yeah, it failed for many reasons, but there are opinions on why it failed. And according to Honoroff, he says, well, there are almost 300 games on Stadia. The vast majority of them are available on other platforms, and the target audience for the games already own those platforms for the most part. So there's one game that I'm going to use, like Destiny 2, for example. That game has obviously built itself around the live service model, and having that game available on other platforms, like no one's going to get Google Stadia just because for that one game, because that's available elsewhere and they don't have to stream it, they can just play it. So that is one reason. You also have them going back on promises as well. So they closed a lot of their in-house studios. Their servers were constantly down, which led to obviously the latency issues. And due to all of the surrounding issues with Google Stadia, it was actually discontinued early this year. A lot later than what I thought it would have been, but it was discontinued. But there are many lessons to be learned from Google Stadia, primarily about how this is promoted and integrated. So how companies such as Microsoft have got around that is by implemented it into actually Game Pass. So you would pay for Game Pass for other reasons, but you get cloud streaming as a part of it. Stadia got a bad rep, but it was a great casual gaming option when it first came out. Yeah, so we kind of go into that idea of accessibility. Like if you're someone who doesn't play games very often and you want to become invested in games, it is viable. And we're starting to see what that was going for in other platforms and other services now. So yeah, quickly going to go through the current state of cloud gaming. So obviously, this was supposed to be a extravagant poster of the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs poster, but I didn't have time to put that together. So the current options for cloud gaming. So obviously you have Xbox Game Pass, which is the big one that probably most people have used. PlayStation, after them purchasing Gaikai, then started to take that tech and apply it to PlayStation Plus. So you can now stream PS3, PS4, and as recently as of October, PS5 games. And Nintendo did the opposite, where it's like games you wouldn't normally expect on a Nintendo console being added to the actual platform through cloud technology. So Resident Evil Village, Guardians of the Galaxy, games with really high spec requirements. So with Game Pass, it's been very successful. They've got over 25 million subscribers as of January last year. That's probably gone up significantly since the acquisitions of a load of studios. But they started to integrate this into televisions and their mobile app. So if you subscribe to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, which I can show you on the next slide. So there are different price points. If you get the Ultimate version of Game Pass, which is on the middle there, you get all of these new games. So you can access a lot of content similar to Netflix, but then you can also stream that content as well to your phone. So you get access to that on your PC, console, and phone. So you can take it with you, which I think is a really clever strategy because you are taking it into different avenues and you are pulling in that audience that you already have. With PlayStation Plus, it's we've kind of spoke about that previously, but they split their services into 3 key areas, so Essential, Extra, and Premium. So the subscription model is based around online multiplayer, but the Premium model, as you see on the left here, adds cloud streaming as an option for how you experience the content. So you can now stream a selection of PS3 games, PS4 games, PS5 games, which is in a turn a good way for preservation as long as servers are up and running, which I'll go through in a moment on the next slide. But Nintendo's approach is very different. So the experience that people have had with the Nintendo cloud streaming, myself included, because I've reviewed a lot of the games that have been released on the Switch through cloud streaming, is that they require you to actually purchase the full game. Whereas on Game Pass, you subscribe and then you can try it out. You don't have to buy it. You've got that subscription. You've paid $12.99 a month to access the content. With the Switch, you can download a demo. I think it's about an hour sometimes of gameplay that you can use. But then you have to be... when you say that cloud gaming has been available on TVs, are you referring to consoles? No, it is now actually available on certain select TVs. So if you've got an Xbox controller and you subscribe to Game Pass on a TV, you can actually play it through the smart TV. Yeah, you can stream it directly to the TV, which is really fascinating. Yeah, that's become an option that you can do now. Xbox announced that partnership last year, and we're starting to see that more and more as an option that can be considered. Yeah, but with Nintendo, the quality of that is debatable. But yeah, you have to pay like a premium fee to actually access the content. No worries. Thank you for asking. But I'm going to quickly, briefly mention NVIDIA GeForce Now. I've already spoke about it. That's basically a bunch of PCs streaming content to your device. So it could have you might not be able to afford a RTX 4090, but you can then stream content that's using that software. And then Amazon Luna, which is Amazon's version of the cloud streaming experience. But so I'm going to quickly talk about the future. So for the future of the technology, there are some questions whether or not it'll be viable. I do think that the increase in demand for, again, on-demand content is definitely the future. So we are very much the type of society now where we like to be able to experience content there and then. And platforms such as TikTok have established this idea of short-form content. So the idea of being able to stream a game for maybe half an hour, see if you like it, you get that short-form content, right? And because they are implementing it into other services, they aren't selling you this as an individual service, depending on, obviously, the service provider. So NVIDIA is a individual service. But you do get to have some successes through, obviously, Game Pass. But then you also have the issue of internet speed, which we spoke about, sustainability, and if it's actually an option for some people. But then you've also got the idea of physical media. So earlier this year, Walmart in the US and Tesco started to discontinue physical games. So the more we go through the digital sort of landscape, there's a greater chance that we start to lose physical media, which can negatively impact games preservation. But if a company can do it well and preserve that content online, I like through their services, I think it is a really good way forward. There we go. Thank you. Hopefully that has been insightful. I'm happy to take any questions. Obviously, I've gone through a lot of different topics there. So. Hi, Ben. Hi, Jamie.
Hi,
Hello.
Jamie.
That was very cool.
That was very awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
What's been one of the best games that you've played on cloud gaming?
Yeah, funny you should ask recently. So when I was writing up this lecture, I decided to try out the xCloud streaming service, and I used Vampire Survivors as my test game. And Vampire Survivors, if you haven't played it, is very addictive. So being able to like stream that game to my phone is like really cool. And now it has touch controls, so I can play it using touch. I don't have to have a controller hooked up to my phone. And that game's obviously just kind of walking around killing enemies and stuff. So that sort of arcadey style really works well for the cloud gaming. And ironically, even though I mentioned that racing games can be problematic for cloud gaming, Forza Motorsport works surprisingly well when I tried that out the other day. So
brilliant.
Cool.
What would you say to someone who has never experienced cloud gaming before? And what would you say are the core advantages? of cloud gaming?
Yeah, so as I was explaining throughout the lecture, that's a really good question. So obviously, there are people that don't really play games all that often. So if there is someone who's trying to get into games, you point at yourself. But I mean, just generally, like you might not be into games and you want to get into games, but you don't know how. I think it's a very good entry point because you get to experience a title that you might not necessarily have any understanding of, but you don't have to download the game, just stream it for maybe half an hour, and that might actually be the catalyst that makes you get into the industry and be into games. It's really interesting. So like I've got family members that have done that and have got into games. Yeah,
that's really cool stuff. Are you currently working on any research in this area?
Yeah, so this lecture was actually built around some research that I am currently undergoing. I want to do some research into sort of the future and sustainability. So we had some questions about that throughout the course of the lecture. I want to actually use that as the premise of research and actually gather some data based on the sustainability and what people think of it.
Brilliant. So we've got a question from the chat for you. As a game designer, I want to try out new games to maybe get more inspiration and be informed on well-established titles. Would you recommend I use cloud gaming to achieve this?
Oh, that's a really good question. So yeah, when it comes to cloud gaming, so you're saying you want to try a load of different games, right? So if you don't have the storage space to download loads of games and you don't feel like you might not want to buy loads of games, right? Because like sometimes you don't know if it's worth investing a lot of money into a game, especially now that we're starting to see the climate in terms of pricing going up as well for games. Like the barrier to entry is a lot higher. So I think there's a lot of free trials that you can do now. So for Xbox, for example, I think you pay £1, you get a month of Game Pass or 3 months of Game Pass.
Yeah.
So you do that and then you can try it out for a bit and you get to experience a load of different pieces of content, not just AAA either, indie, and like there's loads. I think it is really an effective way to experience games. And yeah, as a designer, I do definitely suggest giving that a go if you're interested.
I did similar, so I've been streaming the Halo franchise over to one of my friends, and we got to Halo 5, and because Halo MCC has all the games in it, so I could just stream them through Steam. But I got to Halo 5 and thought, how am I going to do this? Like, do I just dig out my Xbox from the shed that it's hiding in and stream it through OBS? And I was like, no, hang on. Doesn't Xbox have a streaming service? So I used Xbox's streaming service to stream Halo 5 across via Discord, and it was okay.
Yeah. Do you think? Sorry to interrupt, Ben, but we've got another question from the chat.
Mm-hmm.
This one is from Philip Cook. I know you said the lag and latency issues are being developed, but do you think we'll get to the point where cloud gaming can be used in a LAN/esports environment instead of PCs? Also, cool shelves.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you. Right yeah, thank you. I like Nintendo games. So yeah, that's a really good question. So the issue I have with it being used for esports is obviously we spoke about reactivity and the response time and latency, right? So if the technology got to a point where the gameplay experience was optimal and you were able to stream that content to a point where everyone was kind of experiencing the same level of quality in terms of frame rates and just like general stutter not really being a thing, I think it could work. But due to depends on what game it is, right? So if you're playing a game like I don't know, League of Legends, where it's quite reactive and you have to be focusing on a lot of things at once, if there's a delay in the cloud technology, that could be a negative impact. But it again depends on if we're able to get to a point where it is the quality of the technology is there to support that. Who knows? The future might hold that. I mentioned Phil Spencer, and he basically said that he does believe that will get to a point. He just doesn't know when. It's an evergreen piece of technology that's continuing to grow. So.
I'll ask one last question for you. Do you think there is an application for this on the development side of games development?
Yeah, actually, I think there is. So one thing that I did find interesting from Google Stadia is that they try to develop games with cloud gaming in mind. Like their studios were working on a bunch of exclusive titles. Baldur's Gate 3 was actually one of the first games announced for Google Stadia, which is kind of ironic.
That's cool.
But yeah, I think if you could somehow gamify the cloud streaming experience, it could probably make for a really interesting game and make it unique. So imagine getting into a server as part of the gameplay experience. Like, imagine how weird that would be. I think it could work.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, Jaimie Ditchfield.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. Thank you, everyone, for your questions today. We do have the Microsoft Forms feedback. So if you want to give us some feedback on that, you can. It's also posted in the chat. I don't want to keep it up there for long because it covers Jamie's face. So if you want to, I had to keep like bobbing myself in and out to make sure that I wasn't covering anyone when they were presenting. If you have any feedback you want to offer us, please do. Thank you all for your awesome questions and being super engaged. And Jaimie, again, thank you for your time and your expertise on the matter.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Our next
Coming
talk.
up next. Oh,
sorry. Yeah. Our next talk is in 15 minutes. What we are talking about.
We have Rhys Williams talking about the sustainability of esports and its space in the wider ecosystem.
So we'll see you there in 15 minutes. Goodbye.